oh, not seeing people like me like shine in a positive light in media, not seeing people who looked like me around me, even like in school or whatever, really affected, my relationship with my racial identity. It was like,
Hi, I'm Stacey Lee Kong, and this is Making Our Own Way, a Friday Things video series about GTA creatives who are finding their own pathways to success. And I am so excited to be here with the founder of the RepresentASIAN Project, Madelyn Chung. Hi, Madelyn.
Hi.
I'm so excited.
yay!
Tell me what it's like to build a career in Canadian media, because you aren't just the founder of the RepresentASIAN Project. You have been a writer, you've been an editor, a content creator. What has it been like to build that career as an Asian woman in Canada?
It's definitely been interesting. I think I personally have been quite lucky in terms of being able to move forward in my career and have some pretty great gigs and work for some pretty well-established publications. When I first started out, though, I was working at one media conglomerate, which I won't name for privacy, but I was
The company that shall not be named.
but I was working in syndication. So that's kind of how I started out. And I had to work with people who were the editor-in-chiefs of various magazines, and some of them were very old white men. And it wasn't lifestyle content, which is what I was passionate about. And I felt as though they just didn't take me seriously. They're like, oh, this is like just this young girl who dresses crazy, and like she doesn't know what she's doing, and like here they are in their suits and everything.
Yeah.
And I really felt like I had to prove myself to them to, say like, no, I'm perfectly capable of this. I know what type of content you produce that the general audience will like. Just trust me on this. I know what I'm doing. And it came to a point where I felt like I did prove myself to them, because I could see that they were treating me a little bit differently afterwards, and
Right.
like more kind and with more respect. So that was kind of like a really proud moment for me back then, because I was like, oh, I proved myself. Looking back at it now, I'm like, I shouldn't have had to prove myself to them, right? I didn't need that approval from them. But I think I was really lucky in terms of, when I worked at HuffPost, I was in a pretty diverse newsroom. My managing editor was also an Asian woman. And I think while I was there, they really taught me the importance of diversity and inclusion. There's a lot of stuff that I did back then that now I'm just like, oh, geez, like, what was I doing? What was I doing?
We didn't know. But
We
okay,
didn't
it's just so
know.
funny that you say that. I was saying this in another interview too, is that we came up at a time where the way that we learned to create content or to do journalism was by centering a white audience. And I'm still, to this day, 15 years into my career, unlearning that and having to be like, okay, you don't have to explain every single thing. You don't have to assume that your cultural references are so specific that your audience won't understand them.
Yeah.
It's just like frustrating sometimes to be like, oh, you're still doing that. You're still thinking that way. But it was really ingrained in us.
Yeah. I always say, like, this is why I personally think representation is so important, because it's hard for you to dream something if you don't see it in front of you. If you don't see someone who looks like you doing that thing, it's very difficult to imagine yourself doing that. It's very
for sure.
difficult to, as a young journalist, try to break the mold in an environment that doesn't allow you to break the mold.
Or even just like processes become more automatic almost. Like the things that I think young journalists are thinking about today, I had to teach myself that it was okay to think about.
Yeah.
And it was like, I remember being like super junior and updating the writer's guidelines for a magazine I was working at. And it was just like a task that I had given myself because I was an overachiever, as I continue to be. And I remember being like, okay, we talk about the importance of geographic diversity, and there's a line in there about like, we're talking to people in Toronto and Flin Flon. And I was like, okay, so maybe it would be okay if I also said that we're talking to a wide range of ethnicities. And I remember panicking and being like, oh, will I get in trouble if I put that in? And nobody cared. No one cared at all. But it still felt like such a big thing for me to say, okay, so our official writer's guidelines, they explicitly state that you should look for a wide range of ethnicities as your sources.
But good on you for thinking of that.
Okay,
back
but nothing
then.
changed.
But still, like,
nothing changed right away.
But for you to come up with that and to even consider that when we were so conditioned to not think of that is huge.
It's just, but it's all those little moments. And it's like, that was such a big thing for me. And I'm excited that now I think young journalists are like, what do you mean that's a big thing? Like, that's just normal. That to me is very exciting to be like, we actually talk to a lot of people. We don't just talk to one type of person all the time.
That makes us feel old.
It does, but I wasn't going to get into that. We're in fact moving right along from that. Tell everyone, if they may not know, what is the RepresentASIAN Project?
So the RepresentASIAN Project is a platform that's dedicated to celebrating, advocating, and elevating not only Asian representation, but Asian voices in media and beyond that.
Love that. I feel like you've said that a few times.
Yeah.
Have you practiced? Yeah, maybe. Tell me, what was the moment or the situation or like what was the spark for this idea?
The spark came, this is a crazy story, but it came like one night while I was doing my master's in music therapy. I had just finished like a long day of my first placement. I was exhausted. I felt burnt out. All I wanted to do was go to sleep. So I made my dinner. I was in Waterloo. I made my dinner, went to bed, and then I just like got a download. Literally is what I call it. It's just like a download in my brain of like, oh, wouldn't it be really cool to have a publication or a platform that highlighted really cool Asian people doing really cool things? And just, again, going back to, if you don't see yourself,
you can't
do it. Or you could, but it's more difficult to imagine it.
Yeah.
So, and at that point, I was like, I need a name. Like, this could actually be a thing. What could the name be? And then, like, Represent Asian. I was like, I don't know if I just like that. So I was like, RepresentASIAN Project. At this point, it was like midnight or 1 a.m. And I started to just
on your phone.
Yeah. And I was like, I bought the domain name. I think leading up to that, it was really, 2018 was a really turning point in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I had quit my job to pursue going back to school to music therapy. 2018 was also when Crazy Rich Asians came out.
Yes, I remember that because that's how we met.
Yes. So I wrote that article for Flair, which you edited, and it was about, how Crazy Rich Asians, it's not just a movie, it's a sign that like I matter as an Asian person because it was such a big deal for the Asian community back then. And after writing that, it was the first time I had written about my identity. And if you remember, it like did so well. And it was just like, okay, I had decided to quit journalism and go into music therapy because I was so tired of writing about the Kardashians in like a superficial way because I wasn't doing it the way that you're doing it now.
Also, it's fine. Like, it's fine. That is a very fair reason to be like, not on
I just didn't feel fulfilled. And I was like, I love writing and I love telling stories, but I just feel like the stories that I'm telling now aren't doing anything for the greater good.
Right.
So, which is why I was like, okay, I'll pursue therapy because that way I feel like I'm helping people, I'm supporting community, I'm giving back, etc.
Yeah.
And once I wrote that piece, the one for Flair, I realized, wow, okay, identity is something that I could write about and it would be really meaningful and I can see how many people it would like touch and reach and impact. So I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And Flair was really great in terms of, always giving me the opportunity to do that, but other publications didn't. I would like pitch stuff to them that was like an Asian girl's guide to keeping your hair blonde because Asian girls know that your hair turns like orange or like, and most other publications would say, oh, this is too niche for our audience.
That hilarious? And I mean that in actually the most offensive way.
Yeah.
That is also the feedback that I would get when I would be at a magazine and I would be bringing up ideas and I would say, I think this is really interesting, or oh, every year we do a story about Christmas dinner, but like my family doesn't celebrate Christmas in this way. Like, what if we talked about different menu? And a lot of the time it would be, well, that's too niche or that's not relatable. Like, there's a reason that we learned that our audiences were white, and it's because we were told our audiences were white.
Yeah.
Why is it so necessary then to have an outlet like the RepresentASIAN Project that will cover these niche with like the biggest eye roll topics?
Because we didn't have that growing up, right? And I think for me personally, I realized, upon reflection in my later adult years.
Don't say later years like that, please.
But in like the past 5 or so years, 5 to 10 years, I realized, oh, not seeing people like me shine in a positive light in media, not seeing people who looked like me around me, even like in school or whatever, really affected my relationship with my racial identity. It was like, okay, no, I don't want to be Chinese. Like, why would I want to be Chinese? No one thinks that's cool. No one celebrates that. It's like better to be white. You get more advantages in life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. More people want to date you, like all of these different things.
Yeah.
So I think to be able to reach an audience that has not seen themselves or has not had their stories shared, on a bigger scale is super important and necessary.
And powerful. And we have talked about this a lot. We've talked about this in terms of desirability.
Yep.
We've talked about it in terms of work. And you wrote what I think is actually a very brave article too for Flair about not wanting to be Chinese and not dating other Chinese people.
Yeah.
And that's like, I think the other value of, I'm just like going to compliment you now, but I think the other value of a platform like yours is that sometimes the stories are not like positive representation. Sometimes it's not, let me show you that we're just shining in a positive way. It's let's actually talk about the things that we believe about ourselves and the things that we believe about other people. Because we've also internalized those harmful ideas.
Yeah. And I think it's important to talk about those things, right? Because when we internalize them, it just like festers into, all sorts of insecurities.
It's going to come out. It's going to come out.
It's just like not a good thing. And the other thing too that I think is important is we talked about, writing for a white audience. And I'm so tired of that. Like, I don't want writers to feel like they have to explain things for a white audience. I want them to just write for us.
Yeah.
When they're writing for the RepresentASIAN Project or creating content for them, it's like, no, if you know, like people within that community will understand. You don't need to explain it further.
Yes.
And I think that's just so powerful in itself, the need to not have to explain yourself, your culture, your beliefs, your values, because I'm tired of explaining it.
Or like there's other
talk about it.
I just want to talk about it. Or like to me, there's a difference between saying, let's think about the Asian diaspora and like your experience versus my experience and like your connectivity to your culture versus like my last name is Lee Kong and it's because I have a Chinese grandpa and that's a very different experience. And a Chinese grandpa in Trinidad, like it's a very different experience. So let's look for the commonalities and differences in our experience. That's very different than, and so I would like to explain to you that this thing is a food that we all eat. And like, that's not the same thing.
This is when we eat it. This is how we cook it. Like,
this is the cultural meaning. Like it's fine.
And it's important to like learn those things ourselves.
Yes.
Because like I think a lot of stuff, growing up as a second generation Canadian, a lot of things, I don't know the traditions or the meanings behind it. Like you just do it. Your parents tell you, okay, like don't wear shoes in the house, don't go to bed with like wet hair.
Listen,
all of these things, right?
Don't wear shoes in the house though. Like that's actually the law. Please stop it. You don't need an explanation for that. Just do what we say.
But other things, it's like, some people will ask me the traditions. They're like, oh, what is the cultural meaning behind this? And I'm like,
my mom told me so.
I don't know. It's just like what they told me to do, so I do it.
Exactly. But that nuance too, because it's like, then you start thinking about like, well, who has ownership over this identity? And is there like an authentic identity? And then you get a chance to really unpack what that means and who that's maybe keeping out and how that might affect us going forward. Yeah. You also talked about people who are creating content for RepASIAN. So you really literally are creating opportunities for people to tell stories that just, they didn't exist before. What showed you that you could even do that? How did you know that you could do that?
I don't know, I just did it.
This is my favorite answer because obviously you just did it.
I think it was just, I was creating stuff myself for a long time and I was seeing how much it was resonating with other people. And then it kind of got to a point where I was like, I can't do this all by myself. So I need help. But also there's only so much that I am the quote unquote expert on, right? Like I only have so much lived experience in a certain, capacity that I can comment on, but something else, it's like, I'm not going to talk about what it's like to be a Chinese person in Trinidad because like, what the hell do I know about that? So I need someone with that lived experience to be able to do that. So I think just like putting out a broader net to people, because I don't just want to cover, this is a thing in the Asian community where we talk about Asian representation. It skews very East Asian, and I know that. And I know that as an East Asian person, I am much more privileged than South Asian, Southeast Asian, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So I think that for me to just kind of focus on that would be, a detriment to the community and supporting the community, because there are so many other. Asia's so freaking big. Like it's so
literally
big.
like it's huge.
At this point, I don't even know sometimes like who is considered or who would identify as Asian, whether or not they live in Asia, right? Like some people would just say, no, I don't consider myself Asian. I don't consider myself XYZ. Anyways, going back to just, creating these opportunities, it's more so just like there's a need for it. There's a need for more people to be able to see their stories on screen, to hear about experiences that are similar to theirs that I can't provide. Someone else would have to do that.
Yes. I love all of that. Also, I just think when you're looking back, you want to be able to say, like, I knew how this was going to go. I knew what I was going to do. And it's like a really nice reminder for me personally that, like, actually, that's not everyone has like a plan that they're executing. You're just trying things.
Yeah. And that's, I have to give credit to my time at HuffPost for that, is that they were so great in terms of teaching me, like, I grew up with such a perfectionist like background, and everything had to be perfect, and you can't make mistakes, you can't fail, because that is like the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
But for them to say, hey, you want to try something out? Try it. If it works, amazing. We'll do it again. If it doesn't work, it's fine. Yeah. Whatever.
Because there's still the value in the learning.
Yeah. So, and that really was a huge shift for me to be like, whoa, I'm allowed to screw up and make mistakes and learn from them.
I still don't know if I believe that for
is
myself.
But, I know, but
yeah.
It's, so that mindset is really kind of what I try to give to my writers and content creators, is saying like, okay, you're really passionate about this. Let's try it out. If
and
it works,
see how it goes.
Amazing. If not, that's fine. We'll try something different next time.
To me, what is really unique about you is that you are also a registered psychotherapist. You are like, you have this other career, like a whole other life, a whole other life that I know nothing about. Does that work inform your content creation?
Yeah.
How so?
I think it's so interesting how my journalistic background has helped my therapist background, and vice versa. Because first of all, I went into music therapy, and I won't go into like all the logistics of like what music therapy is, because it's just so much and there's so many different definitions. But a lot of times you can incorporate talk therapy into music therapy, or vice versa. You're doing talk therapy and you're incorporating music. But what was interesting was a lot of the people in my program, they were all trained musicians, and like their bachelor, their undergrads were in music. So for them to like think about talking to clients, and
that was hard. Okay,
that was like
I get it.
really hard for them, right? Because they're like, I thought I was just going to be playing music, and like when it came to the talking, they were like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know how to talk to people, in that way. I don't know what do I ask them? Like, what do I say? And for me, I'm just like, oh, this is just like interviewing someone, right? So I'm like, oh, the talking is fine. It's the music that I'm a little bit more nervous about, but like the talking, I'm great at. I can do that for sure.
In your sleep.
Yeah. So, but what I think is really cool is once I kind of was in that, after I finished that program, and I was approaching things from more of a therapeutic lens and from a trauma-informed lens, it really impacted the way I interviewed. And I feel like now I have such special skills as an interviewer, because I'm able to make the subject comfortable enough to really open up and kind of not just ask them all the superficial questions, but kind of get deeper and kind of go to a place where most other interviewers can't take the subject.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really cool part of like how they've helped each other.
I think that's such a good point. And because everything that I know about trauma-informed reporting and interviewing, I just had to learn myself. It came up as I was Googling, or as I was, especially at Flair, we would be covering stories about sexual violence, we'd be covering stories about traumatic topics, and it was like, how do I do a good job of doing this? Like, we aren't trained that way.
But I feel like everyone should be at this
Absolutely.
point. Like every profession should have some sort of trauma.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even, I think, you don't have to be talking about something that is as quote unquote serious as sexual violence. You could be talking about like, how do we talk about COVID? Like, how do we talk about the way that we made it through this huge pandemic that changed the entire world? Or especially after 2020, how do you talk about anti-Blackness? How do you talk about anti-Asian hate? How do you talk about reconciliation?
Yeah.
Like the way that we are, even when we're interviewing people, that it isn't about trauma, it's this understanding that like actually all of that trauma is just floating under the surface. Like it's there.
Yeah, because we've all experienced some sort of trauma, right? Yeah. I think in the past, the word trauma was so loaded, and you would think it was like these really big, serious things, which it is, but like we all have some sort of childhood trauma that we went through that affects who we are today. And, we have certain triggers because of that. We have certain reactions because of that. And everyone has something. And I think that's why the trauma-informed training is so important, because you don't want to be, especially if you are a healthcare practitioner, especially if you are a journalist, it should be implemented in every workplace, in every school training. Everyone should be receiving this and figuring out how to interact with people in a way that is trauma informed.
And just purely from a like human perspective.
Yeah.
Because it
just makes you a better human.
It just makes you a better human. But I also think because some of what we're talking about, like when we're talking about the way that the word trauma is loaded or the way that even the word trigger, like I think a lot of that language has also been co-opted in a political way so that when you say these things, it sounds like you're like so woke or so liberal or so whatever. But I actually do just want to make the point that you're just caring for other human beings. Like that's actually all it is.
Yeah. And we should be caring for each other.
You would think, right?
How crazy our world is right now.
Right. Like why wouldn't you?
We need to care for each other more than ever at this point.
Agree. One of the things that I most admire, I admire a lot of things about RepASIAN, but I really love that, as you were saying, you're expanding the Western idea of what it means to be Asian. And I think part of that is also how you think about how we can kind of hold ourselves accountable for the things that we say and do. And so I'm thinking specifically of you and I like co-wrote this piece about Aquafina and anti-Black language and anti-Blackness and using language.
Yeah.
But in general, what I really like is that you are uplifting Asian voices, but you are doing so in a really nuanced way. And I wanted to ask you, why is it important for your brand to address racism, address colonization, address like inter-community violence, and not just like white supremacy?
Because if I don't do it, who else is?
Yeah.
That's it.
Like literally no one else is doing that.
No one else is doing it. And I have built a platform that has such great reach where it's like, I feel like it's a no-brainer. It's my responsibility to do that because if it's going to help the world and our community in a greater way, then why wouldn't I do it if I have, the privilege of having this platform to do so?
But not everyone thinks that holding our members of our own community accountable is doing good for the community at large.
And if they don't think that, then that's just them, right? But for the people who do, at least I can reach those people.
Yeah.
Because that Aquafina post, remember the feedback for that. People were like, I'm going to cancel this page.
People were upset.
Why aren't you talking about like Black people attacking Asian people and blah, blah, blah. And like, you're going against our own. And I was like, whoa, I'm not trying to cancel Aquafina. And we said we're not trying to cancel Aquafina, but we just want her to hold herself accountable.
And like we want us to hold ourselves accountable.
Exactly. Because like the Asian community is so historically anti-Black. So like I think about my elders and like my relatives when we're driving somewhere and you see like a Black person walking by and they immediately lock the doors. Right? Just like little things like that you don't realize and then you internalize and then you have this fear and these ideas around a specific group of people.
And if we aren't the ones to say that's not okay and to actually say it out loud, then to your point, no one else is, right?
And I think there's like, because everything we learned in school is from such a white lens, we don't learn about like the history of solidarity between our communities. We don't learn about, the ways that we've helped each other, also the ways that we've been really terrible to each other and like how we can learn from that. So I think it's so important to bring that historical context to the present because again, we didn't learn about that in the past. How would we know?
And from a purely practical perspective, I think about this all the time. Like nothing is going to work if we don't stand in solidarity with one another. Like if we think about our struggles as separate struggles, first of all, that makes no sense. It's like actually just ahistorical and kind of stupid. But B, if we aren't standing there in support of one another, like we need that support from other groups and we need to give that support to other groups.
Yeah, I remember hearing someone say in the past that like white supremacy has us fighting for this like tiny miserable piece of pie.
Yes.
When really we should all be working together to demand the whole pie.
Just the whole pie. Literally, that's what it is. Yes. More pie. What motivates you to keep doing this work?
It's hard sometimes, like I burn out a lot and a lot of it, especially when there are really hard things to report on, like, Monterey Park recently, all the anti-Asian hate in the past few years, it can get really, really draining. The Atlanta spa shootings, oh my gosh, like it was just horrific because it impacts you so personally, right? It's not only something that you're covering professionally, but it impacts you very deeply in a personal way.
Yeah.
And I think what it comes down to is if I don't do it, who else is going to do it, right? Like a non-Asian person is not going to be able to cover this as well as an Asian person or a person with a lived experience. And that's just a fact. That's just how it is. And you kind of just have to go with it. I think just seeing the impact that it has on people, like that RepASIAN has on people, and hearing people say, like, you know, thank you for making me feel seen. Thank you for, you know, doing this work. Thank you for this important work that you're doing. Sometimes, like, it goes in through one ear out the other because I'm just so, like, in it and, like, just so in the thick of things. But, like, when I really give myself the time to take a step back to see what I've built, I'm like, oh, wow, like, I did that, you know? Like, people that I've looked up to for years now follow this page and, like, share stuff.
They're so excited because it's still so rare.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the way we do things, too, is quite different from, like, the next sharks and stuff of the world.
Yes,
because, again,
absolutely.
Like you said, the nuance is so important to me, and to just kind of do things from a more holistic lens as opposed to, like, sensationalizing everything and, you know, making stuff for clicks and likes and shares. Like, we still have to do that, but it's like, how can we do it in a way that is impactful, whether that means, you know, important for people to learn about something, whether it means, you know, just brightening up someone's day with a funny meme or a funny video.
It's a balance. It's a balance. It's not just let me cover only the heavy stuff. It's like, also, this is hilarious. Also, you know, this guy looks really hot on the cover of GQ. Like, what am I going to do?
There's room for both. There's room for all of that, which I think people tend to forget. A lot of people in the past were like, oh, I love RepASIAN because it's all, like, good news. It's all, like, good, positive stuff, and you're not doing all... But I'm like, I don't want to just be good news because that's not life.
Yeah.
You know, we need to look at the hard things too. We need to look critically at things like the racism within our community, right?
Right.
All of these different things that are so important that we need to critically reflect on that we're not doing, as well as, you know, looking at the hot guys and girls of Physical 100.
Yes.
You know?
But I also think, like, that is a huge underpinning of Friday Things is that I'm trying to take the things that young women like seriously, all of the things. And it's actually deeply unfeminist to be like, oh, we're going to write off some of this stuff just because it's joyful or just because it's coded as feminist. It's like misogynistic to say this thing that is coded as feminine is not as important as this disaster, this political thing happening over here. And, like, I also just think we need more joy in our lives.
We need more joy. And, like, we just need, again, balance, right?
Yeah.
Like, we need to hold space for all of these things.
All the things. What are you most proud of about RepASIAN?
I don't even know if I could tell.
It's a really easy question that I'm ending on. It's very small. Like, don't worry.
I think I'm just proud of the impact that it's had. I think personally, I've had so much imposter syndrome my whole life and like wanting to make the people around me proud and feeling the need to prove myself again. And just, you know, I still feel like I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet because there's still that driven, ambitious part of me.
Yeah.
But I think, again, like I said before, when I take a step back and I look, it's like, whoa, I really, and it's hard for me to say it too, because I don't want to like brag or anything. It feels like, you know,
get that, yes.
But it's like, oh wow, like I actually really built something great that is impacting a lot of people and that can hopefully change the discourse within the Asian community and outside of the Asian community of like, you know, how we kind of look at different issues that we are being faced with.
Yes. And I think I also have that same impulse to be self-deprecating or to minimize, but it's not that is changing, that has changed and is changing the discourse. Like the things that you're posting about and the thoughtfulness that you're taking in your approach, that is changing the way that people talk about these issues, Asian people, like different celebrities. That is all, you're already making that impact.
Thank you. I don't know if I like feel that I'm there yet, but
that's because that's therapy. that is like, we're gonna go to therapy for that, but I'm just gonna tell you,
thank you
that you are. Okay, thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad we could do this. Good? Okay.
If I were to give advice to Asian girls and young women who want to get into media, I'd say just go for it. This is the time where you can have your voice heard. And for so long, we have been conditioned to believe that our voices don't matter, our opinions don't matter, that we have to be silent and docile and meek and keep our heads down and just work hard and not go against the grain in order to survive. But things are different now. We have the ability, thanks to social media and just having greater reach around the world, to really have our voices heard, to share our message and to talk about the things that are important to us. So it's really important for you to remember that you matter, your voice matters, your opinion matters, and your voice deserves to be heard by everyone else.
That was a really good answer.
Thank you.